Encik Khairil Abdullah, Chief Executive Officer of Axiata Digital Services. Puan Ruzi Ajith, Chief Executive Officer of CGS-CIMB Securities Malaysia. Mr. Foong Chen, CGS-CIMB Regional Telecommunications Analyst. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us at the 7th CGS-CIMB Thoughts Leadership Series. Our session today will begin with an introduction by our CEO, Puan Ruzi, then followed by a conversation with Encik Khairil, moderated by our colleague Foong. Just some housekeeping rules before we proceed is that if you have any questions, feel free to drop them at the chat or Q&A function, and Foong will pick it up as we go along. And as for those who are watching from Facebook Live, feel free to post your questions there. You will also be picked up. And as for those who are watching from Facebook Live, if you do want to share it, also feel free to share it with your friends. So without further delay, let me pass the session now to Puan Ruzi.
Thank you, Chimeng. Charles Darwin once said, "It is not the strongest or the most intelligent that will survive, but the one that is most adaptable to change." Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our 7th CGS-CIMB Thought Leadership Series, where we will discuss on the topic of leading digital solutions from startups to scale-ups. Thought is a social impact platform for prominent individuals to share their wealth of experience to inspire young, up-and-coming talent and knowledge sharing to keep abreast with the industry trends to be future-ready. Evidently, entrepreneurship is gaining huge traction, especially among the millennials. While the promise of hope and adventure is captivating, the road to success may be more difficult than it seems. We at CGS-CIMB support innovation and entrepreneurship and hope to bring positive impact to the dreamers, innovators, and trailblazers of the world. With this, we're proud to present Encik Khairil Abdullah, CEO of Axiata Digital Services, to share his experience, knowledge, and aspiration within the digital solution space in conversation with our regional telco analyst, Mr. Foong. Without further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Foong to start the conversation.
Thank you very much, Ruzi. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's Thought Leadership session, where we have the privilege of speaking to Mohammad Khairil Abdullah, the CEO of Axiata Digital Services. Thank you very much, Khairil, for your time today. I will start by giving some background on Khairil, and then we will then proceed to talk about his career experience, what he has learned over the years, and also to get him to share some of his thoughts on digital talent development and also with keeping up with rapid technological changes. For call participants, should you have questions at any point during this call, please send them in via the chat box, and we will try to get through all of them if time permits. Now, on to some background on Khairil. Khairil holds a master's degree in engineering and manufacturing engineering from the University of Cambridge, as well as an MBA from INSEAD, France. In the earlier part of his career, Khairil was an operations consultant at Coopers and Lybrand, which then merged into what we now know as PricewaterhouseCoopers. And he also had stints running tech startups. He then went on to join Bain & Company, a leading global management consultancy, where he stayed for more than 15 years, worked out of their various offices around the world, and was also a partner. He then joined Axiata Group in 2012, and in 2014, he was appointed as the CEO of Axiata Digital Services, or ADS in short. So that's a bit of a background on Khairil, a pretty impressive CV there. And with that, we can proceed to the conversation itself. So good morning, Khairil. I think we can start. Let's start with your time at Bain & Company, as that was a major building block in your career before you joined Axiata. So maybe you can start the conversation today with you telling us, what you did in Bain and what did you specialize while you were working there?
Sure, Foong, and I'll echo what you said. A very good morning to you, Ruzi, the rest of the fantastic crew from CGS-CIMB. Ruzi, I think this is a fantastic platform that you created, and I wish you the best of luck in not just this session, but in the future sessions as well. Foong, a great question to start off the conversation this morning. So I spent, yes, close to 16 years at Bain & Company. At the start of my career, I was effectively a generalist consultant because that's what typically you do for the first parts of your career. It's only towards the later end of your career when you become an associate partner and a partner that you start specializing in certain fields. So as a generalist consultant, I think one of the most amazing things that you get exposure to is a variety of industries. So, I had to work on projects on fast-moving consumer goods, on logistics companies, obviously tech. I've always had a leaning towards tech, so I tried to get myself on as many tech cases as I could. And then towards the later part, I started focusing on both tech and telecom. It was actually a single combined practice. And then towards the final few years, one of the things that happened was Bain had wanted to set up an office in Kuala Lumpur. They looked around the partnership globally. They found a partner sitting in Australia. I was actually working out of Australia back then. And they brought me back to the region to start up the Kuala Lumpur office. So just before I left, I was both managing partner for the KL office, as well as the managing partner for the Southeast Asia tech and telco practice, right? So that was kind of my last posting before I joined Axiata. I think you learn a lot of things when you're a consultant, but I think the ones that I would sort of take away in terms of how it's helped me with what I do right now. As a consultant, as I said before, you move into a variety of different business verticals and different issues. And what that creates is, for the lack of a better word, thinking agility. Because you're always thrown into different situations, you learn how to find ways to solve different types of business problems in different verticals across different geographies. You mentioned that I've sort of worked around the world. Doing a project in Japan is very, very different from doing a project in Germany, which is also, again, very different from doing work for a tech startup, for a tech business in the US, in San Francisco, right? And so you build up a repertoire of different ways to solve different business problems. You're not counting on experiences per se, but you're actually counting on a way of developing solutions that is adaptable to the different environments, different situations. And I think that's kind of the biggest takeaway, because I feel like one of the things that, and we can delve into it later on in this conversation this morning, one of the big issues I find is that sometimes people bring too much of their own individual experience into what they're doing, and in a digital arena that may not help, because actually there's a big chance that whatever you've learned in the last 20 years is actually not going to help you. What's going to help you is your adaptability to thinking in a very agile way to be able to solve those business problems.
Okay, so agility here is probably the key skills and that you brought with you from your time at Bain, I suppose. And that's very important, I guess, in today's very fast-changing world that we are in. Okay, that's very good. So when you joined Axiata in 2012, you were appointed as the Group Chief Marketing and Operations Officer. And 2 years on, in 2014, you were appointed the CEO of Axiata Digital Services. Was it the plan all along that when Tan Sri Jamal at that point got you to join Axiata, that you would eventually lead the digital business unit, or did that sort of come up by chance? Can you just share with us the story?
So I'll share with you exactly how it happened.
Yeah.
The quick answer is no, it wasn't part of the plan. I think the plan that Tan Sri had was that at some stage after a short stint as the Group Chief of Marketing and Group Chief of Operations, was that I'd go and run one of the operating companies, right, as CEO of one of the telcos. But one of the roles that I played when I was in that role as Group Chief of Marketing and Chief of Operations is we thought we basically thought about the future of each company, the future leadership talent of each company. And so at that stage, around 2014, Axiata Digital had already been set up for about 18 months. Nothing was moving per se. And so there was a conversation that I had with him about sort of placing a new CEO in that business. And he asked me sort of what criteria should we be placing for the candidate that we want to put there, right? So I straight off the bat, I said, look, first of all, he can't be too corporate, right? Because obviously, Axiata is a corporation, and there are, and it's changed a lot now, but back then there were some of the bureaucratic types, within Axiata as an organization. So I did say, he can't be too corporate. Number two, he can't be too telco. Right. And then number three, he needs to have a track record. He or she needs to have a track record working with the operating company CEOs, right? Because a lot of what Axiata Digital's initial mandate was actually developing businesses and adjacencies to actually help and support the core telco business. So criteria number three was essentially, this person needs to have a track record of kind of working with the OpCo CEOs. And Tan Sri turns around and said, "You realize that's you, right, Khairil?" So no, it wasn't planned. But I would also say that the other thing that happened was because back in 2013, I actually presented a paper to the group board, and in that I said, "Look, Axiata needs to become like a Tencent." And back then, I mean, Tencent's actually quite different now, but back then Tencent was this massive platform. And what they've done is they had actually acquired a lot of customers or consumers via their chat app. And then after that, they started slapping on top of it a lot of different other usage, if you like, the emojis, the stickers, the games, the content, et cetera, et cetera. And then obviously they created a payment platform to kind of allow the transaction to happen, right? So this was sort of my attempt to convince the board that we need to pivot to become less of a telco, but more of a platform company. And I think maybe either, I don't know whether the board sort of was excited with this vision or the board, wanted kind of to build it. And so they sort of, exiled me to Axiata Digital, right? And then Axiata Digital back then was very different from what it is now. When I took over Axiata Digital, I think we had a grand total of, it was 13 just before I joined. And then I joined together with someone else who then became my CFO. And so that made 15 of us, right? And today there's about, I think, 1,200 of us. Yeah, so it's a little bit bigger than what it was back then. So yeah, it wasn't planned, not at all.
Okay, that's a pretty interesting story. But without hindsight, I mean, with hindsight, yes, I mean the story that you shared. But if I look around the group, actually, I don't see anyone else more suitable to be in this role than yourself. And it's quite curious that you were, in the Chief Marketing and Operations Officer role in the first place, given how agile and technically quite savvy as you've showcased yourself to be in the last many years. So yeah, okay, interesting story there. So as the CEO of ADS since 2014, it must have been both very interesting and exciting times over the last 7 to 8 years. And as an external observer, I recall in the early years, there was a fair bit of experimentation at ADS. And of course now, ADS has sharpened its focus, right, on a couple of key business pillars, Boost, ADA, and Affiliate. So perhaps can you share with us some of the interesting things that happened throughout the last 7 to 8 years, and of course the challenges as well during that time?
Yeah, no. So you started this question by saying that there was a period of experimentation, and Foong, you're absolutely right. I think when I first joined the Axiata Group, so back in 2012, when I took on that role, I think in one of the first group board meetings that I attended, this was when the fate of Axiata Digital was set. And in fact, Tan Sri Azman Mokhtar, the former CEO of Khazanah, who was back then the chairman of Axiata Group, he basically said, look, let's set aside a pot of money to go do R&D on digitalization. And again, this was back in 2012 when that word was relatively new. So, I know that Tan Sri Azman was a former speaker on this particular forum, right? And I have incredible respect for this gentleman, and with the kind of foresight that he had on thinking about the need to experiment with digitalization way back in 2012, right? And truth be told, the first conversations around the digital revolution within the Axiata Group board happened around 2011, right? Even before I joined. Great foresight from those folks there. And so the first bit was a lot of experimentation. We actually built a lot of companies back then that, if you like, the mandate was to support the core business in either helping them grow average revenue per user, helping them reduce churn, and then helping them acquire new data customers. Because obviously we were investing in the 4G networks, we wanted to acquire data customers. So anything that we could do to build digital businesses to actually support those three goals, that's effectively what we were experimenting a little bit more on, right? So actually we did a lot of that. By the way, I'm going to dial the clock forward a little bit on that particular story, and I'll dial the clock back again in a short while. But with those set of assets, so we continued to build them. We got actually quite a number of them profitable, and around 2016 or so, we started transferring a lot of these businesses back to the operating companies, right? Because these were units that required the scale of the opcos to be able to sort of take them to the next level. We had taken them to a certain level. We transferred them all back, profitable companies to the opcos. Then the second phase was essentially recognizing as a mandate that we as a telco had a lot of hidden assets that were very relevant, very synergistic to the digital revolution. So if you think about it, we had a lot of access to customers, and if you're a Spotify or a Netflix or whoever else, you kind of do want to get access to the customers that a telco would have, right? Much like Tencent, every time they introduce a new function, it's actually to tap onto the very large customer base that they have. And so we recognize that same thing as well, that there are a lot of assets that we have. So customers being one of them, the insights about the customers, the knowledge that we have about our customers, and of course the retail access points, right? And so when you start thinking about those assets, we said that basically there must be digital businesses that we can actually go out and create and build to actually leverage upon those assets to create new sources of value for the group, right? And that's when we started doing a little bit more aggressive experimentation. These are things that may not necessarily add to the value of the core operating telco, but is actually sort of tapping onto those assets, right? So we experimented with, our early experiments with financial services because we felt that actually we have access to the customers, we know what they want, and look, we have all these retail points, right? And that's when we started sort of looking at micropayments. We started looking at a digital agency because we could tap onto the knowledge of the insights of our customers, right? And that's when the experimentation sort of shifted towards building these key pillars that you now see today, right? Which is our financial services arm, our API gateway, which allows the Spotifys of the world to connect to those assets, and then obviously ADA, which is our digital agency, our data and AI company. So we've kind of gone through, sort of three very distinct phases in our evolution. And as you say, we are now sitting on these pillars within Axiata Digital.
So when you started, in terms of the experimental phases, right, were there periods of time where, you invested in companies and you said, after a while, oops, this is probably not something we should have got into, or perhaps, this actually would have required significantly a lot more money to scale up, and that was not something that perhaps we have the resources to do. And also the people around those businesses and all that. Any interesting insights or challenges that you have faced on those?
Yeah, so I'll tell you where the businesses that we've exited so far. We've exited some businesses and made a profit of them, but there's some of them we've actually exited and by and large didn't get the return that we were looking for. So I'll start with e-commerce, right? So we had built two e-commerce businesses, one in Malaysia. It was called 11th Street. It's actually called Presto Mall now because it was sold to some another conglomerate. And then in Indonesia, we built something called Elevenia. A lot of people don't know this, but actually in 2016, I think, I'm trying to remember the exact dates now, but for the first quarter of 2016, Elevenia was actually the largest e-commerce company in Indonesia by GMV, right? Gross merchandise value, the measure of gross revenue. So we were bigger than Lazada Indonesia back then. And what happened then was very soon after that, Alibaba came and bought out Rocket Internet from Lazada. I think the first check that they wrote was 500 million, if I recall correctly. And when that happened, we go, oh wow, okay. And by the way, the 500 million, obviously there was some secondary, but there was some primary shares within that as well. And so they were starting to pump some money in there. I recall that so the 500 was secondary, and then there was another 500 primary. And at that stage, we had collectively, I think, only put in about 80 million into our e-commerce businesses across Malaysia and Indonesia, and Lazada pumped in 500 million. Alibaba pumped in 500 million into Lazada. So we were saying, okay, game's going to get a little bit more difficult now. And then no more than 12 months later, they whacked in another billion. So they wrote another $1 billion check. And then in Indonesia, we reckon that actually about 600 to 700 million of that $1 billion US dollars actually went into Indonesia. And then that was at the time that we go to your point, Foong, that we would need a major investor before we can actually sort of scale up, right? And then truth be told, we should probably have thought about that a year before when Alibaba first appeared. But we thought we could kind of sort of make it work, right? And then when they wrote the second check, it was kind of game over for us, right? And we managed to sell it to one of the Indonesian conglomerates. We didn't get the return that we were looking for. Likewise, in Malaysia, we sold it to PUC. They've done wonders to the business. PUC is also one of the contenders on the digital banking license. So we wish them luck. And at the back of that, they're sitting on an e-commerce asset, which will be very useful for them in the digital banking arena, right? So that was one that didn't sort of go our way, and it was really kind of, we just, as a telco, we'd rather put the money behind the 4G towers, or very soon the 5G towers, and to be able to kind of compete against Alibaba, that's going to be tough. That was one. The other one was around content distribution and content development. So at one point, we actually developed our own version of Spotify. You can imagine that Spotify actually does generate a lot of revenues for the telco, especially if you are the developer of that service. And so we had that, but what we didn't recognize was the very challenging task of actually signing up the studios, the music publishers, the artists, working with them to promote the product. I think obviously everyone at that stage recognized that Spotify was the big giant, but that they were not invincible. And so everyone created their versions of it. That was roughly the time when Deezer came out. We thought that, given that at that stage we had 300 million customers, we could come up with our own version as well. There were a few artists in the US led by folks like Jay-Z that thought that, given that we're artists, we could probably come up with our own versions of a distribution. They developed Tidal. I don't know if you remember that. And so there were a lot of experiments going on with that particular business model. Truth be told, people should have recognized that actually by that stage, Spotify's distribution reach was already immense, right? And that their freemium model was actually helping them acquire customers by the thousands and the millions. And so it was going to be very, very hard for us to compete with them. And so we also exited that particular business. Yeah. So there were those that we sort of learned our lessons from. But I think true to the culture of Axiata Digital, when we do fail at something, we capture a lot of that learnings there, and then we plow it into our new ventures. And if I look at what we're doing at Boost in Malaysia right now, there are a lot of lessons that we learned from our e-commerce days that's now being put into the businesses, into the financial services businesses.
Okay, so that's very interesting, because everything that you're doing at ADS is, one could say, is pretty much starting from scratch, and you have to figure out everything and as to how it may develop in the years to come, which is quite an exercise for the brain.
Yeah.
in terms of doing that. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So any lessons throughout that journey as to what works and what doesn't in general in running a tech company? I mean, do you for example, set a much shorter duration in testing out ideas and things like that before you decide whether what works and what doesn't?
No. I think so. There are many lessons, by the way, but the two that even as we think about new things that we're doing within Axiata Digital, within Boost, within ADA, I think the two that sort of we always keep a close eye on is, if you like, sort of the sort of agile experimentation model, right? Meaning to say that we want to launch MVPs, right, most viable products, right, in very short durations, but we're also very open or very keen, very open to canning projects, right? In the sense that if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. That's number one. And number two is to keep a very close eye on what we call unit economics trajectory, right? So and unit economics, basically the science behind that is, at the very basic level, for every single product that you sell, are you making money, right? So forget, your acquisition cost, forget your fixed overheads and fixed costs and overheads and whatnot. So at the most marginal level, are you making money, right? So I'll give you, for example, the equation for what do you call it, unit economics of a payments business, right? The payments business, the raw materials is actually effectively the cash, right? So the cash in costs becomes the raw material, and then the payment MDRs, right, the merchant discount rates, what you charge the merchants, becomes the revenue. So at the very core level, is your MDRs higher than your cash-in rates, right? And if it's not, then your unit economics negative, right? Now, of course, you can slap other marginal costs onto the thing. So we track that very closely. It may not be unit economics positive upon launch, so and sometimes you don't expect it to be, but there needs to be a trajectory for it to be positive, right? So as an example, and this is why we're very interested in the digital bank license. This is why we're very interested in the lending business. We're able to dish out loans, very small ticket loans, and I think the smallest loan we've ever given out was $62, right? And I can't see a bank ever giving out a $62 loan, but that's because our marginal cost is close to zero for distributing the loan, and our marginal cost for processing the loan, again, because it's a machine learning credit scoring engine, our marginal cost for processing the loan is also close to zero. So then all I need to worry about is my NPLs, my losses, and what you call it, my cost of capital, by and large, right? And so therefore I can charge a relatively low rate, or I can go after very small ticket sizes, which is kind of what we do, so as not to compete with the banks. But that's a model for us sort of looking at unit economics, right, as a means for ensuring that we don't throw money into businesses that will continue to burn a lot of cash and there's kind of no end in sight, right? E-commerce, by the way, in the early days, and I would say that now with the increased competition between Lazada and Shopee, it's a little bit going back to those days again. But in the days when we were competing against Lazada, there were times when the unit economics was negative, right? That for every product you sell, you were actually losing money because the commission that you get on every item was actually below your acquisition cost, right? Below all the costs that it takes to actually kind of serve this particular revenue. And so that's why we didn't see as much future in it, and that's why we sort of bowed out. Now, thankfully, after Lazada established a little bit of a dominance, temporary dominance, they were able to create some positive unit economic scenario in the market. But obviously now with increased competition with Shopee, I think it's gone back to negative territory again.
Okay, interesting observations there, Khairil. Okay, so maybe we can talk a bit about another interesting issue, which is basically, ADS is a tech company that is born from within a telco. And as we all know, telcos are great at delivering reliable, consistent services, right? What we term as telco-grade infrastructure and service. But we all also know that telcos are not the most innovative companies out there. So can you talk a bit about some of the constraints you face being in that position, i.e. a tech company that was born from within the telco, and how did you manage those constraints as ADS pursued scale? in the last 7 to 8 years?
That's a great question, and in fact, one of the things that I get sucked into a lot now is to talk to other large corporations about sort of what we did, right? Now I'll share a little story. So after being an ex-consultant, the first thing you do when you land into a new job is you've got your 30-day plan and you've got your 100-day plan, right? And so when I shared to Tan Sri my 100-day plan, which we talked about a little bit earlier in this conversation, which is a lot of these experimentation around these new businesses that we were going to build. We actually didn't move into execution mode or implementation mode on that 100-day plan, right? Yes, we went after the low-hanging fruits, and those were sort of the easy ones, but actually we focused on building a culture for the organization. So we went through an exercise, and I remember that there were doubters, right? The leadership team was sort of questioning me. Are you sure? Are you sure you want to focus on culture and not going out and implementing your strategy, right? But to me, it was very important that we focused on the culture because of some of the things that you were hinting at, right? In the sense that in order for a digital organization, a tech organization to thrive, we have to break the mold away from, if you like, the traditional telco mindset, right? A traditional large corporation mindset. And so we came up with 6 cultural values, which actually we still, it's still part of our DNA today, right? And I'll mention some of these, and then I'll tell you kind of the story behind that. But by the way, one of them, which we talked about a few minutes ago, we call it fail, to learn, right? So fail being a verb, and we recognize that there will be failures because we want to experiment, but the key is to learn, right? And actually we change our compensation system in such a way that if you like, there are discounts and multipliers that we will levy on the particular individual's performance rating based on how he performed on the culture side as well. We use the culture DNA to hire, to recruit, et cetera, right? So we're very serious about this, the DNA that we sort of built. But I'll share some of them with you. So one of the pillars, cultural pillars, the word is, or the phrase is, dream big and be bold, right? And I'll tell you a little bit of a story. So when we were starting, if you like, one of our businesses, there were 2 businesses that were kind of in the same stage of evolution. They were about a year old, and it was during our sort of annual planning cycle, trying to decide how much money we're going to put into this particular business to help them scale up. One of so we had 2 project leaders, if you like, right? And project leaders are our pre-CEOs. They're not CEOs yet because we haven't created entities around them, but they're basically the leads of these projects, right? So one of the projects which became Appigate as it is today. So the project lead that basically kind of came up to me and said, okay, ambition for next year is to grow 30%. Right. And then we had another guy who kind of came up to us, and this guy who led a project, he's ex-Google, I believe, at that stage. And he came up to us and said, okay, we're going to grow 5x. So one came and told me it's 30%, and the other one came and told me 5x. Now I'll let you guess which one came from the telco background. I already hinted at the guy who kind of came from a Google or tech environment, right? And that's a little bit sort of what we're looking for. We're looking for people who sort of say, well, I want to grow 5x, I want to grow 10x, right? And in fact, actually, the story goes on that in the discussion with the gentleman who wanted to grow his business 30%, I was doing math and I go like, wait, that's nothing, right? You're a 1-year-old business. You need to be growing 5x, right? And so sorry, I actually said 3x to him back then. But then as I was thinking, he was talking and he was defending why it's impossible to grow 3x, and then I go like, well, you need to be thinking that way. But as he was talking, I was thinking that actually even 3x is not enough. So at the end of his defense, if I can call it that, I then turned around and I said, look, we're going to grow this business 10x in 2 years. And then there was a long pause, silence, right? And then he said, in order to grow 10x, we would need to do A, B, C, D. And I completely jumped at it and I said, that's exactly what we want. We want you to break out of that mold and think about what you need to grow the business 10x. And so that's something that we still hold very near and dear, right? Everything we start off with, right? We want them to grow, have the ability to sort of grow 10x, right? Otherwise, it's going to be very hard to sort of scale up to the right level. So that's one. the understatement, I won't go through all 6 of them, but the understatement that I will mention is one that says, be humble and team up. One of the things that was sort of endemic to telcos, or maybe just large corporations in general, was that it was very hard for them to partner with sort of smaller companies, right? So here's an anecdote from the time when I was the group chief marketing officer, the chief operations officer. So because I was from Bain & Company, when I left, I actually got contacted by a fellow colleague from the Stockholm office. You know, Bain is a small partnership. You kind of know the partners around the world. And they basically said, hey, look, you know, there's a company that's visiting Southeast Asia. They'd like to meet you. You should go talk to them. So this was 2012. I think this was around July 2012 when I first joined Axiata. And this company came and they made a pitch, right? And I was very excited, right? And they were in the music streaming business, which was kind of very, very new. So I then brought this gentleman to go meet with some of our chief marketing officers to see whether we can productize what they were talking about, whether we can kind of collaborate, right? And so the first, then I remember one particular CMO, and I will not name which country it was, and he had 2 questions. The first question was, what is music streaming? Because this is 2012, no one knew what music streaming was, right? And they were trying to figure out, because back then everybody bought music on iTunes. You know, I don't know, you pay like $1.20 US, and you get to download, you know, Bruno Mars or whatever, right? And so there's sort of question mark around the music streaming model. So he asked the question. The second question actually wasn't even a question, but it was more like, I mean, for lack of a better word, it was more like arrogance, right? In the sense that it was like, you know, we typically work with large American companies like the IBMs of the world, and, you know, if it's music, Warner Brothers or whatever, right? Why should we work with a small Swedish startup? Now, you know, of course, dial the clock forward. That small Swedish startup is now called Spotify. It is a giant in that industry, but we missed our chance to work with them because we were too big as a telco. We were chest thumping, right? So when I started ADS, I wanted to make sure that that didn't happen, and that's why we have this value that says be humble and team up. Right? We don't want to ever have to go through those kind of situations again. Now, the good news about Axiata is we went through a very big cultural transformation as a group. This started about 4 years ago. We called it the MAD culture, M-A-D, which stood for Mobile, Agile, Digital, right? And I think, you know, when we started Axiata Digital, you know, we tried to recruit a lot of people from outside of the telco industry. At one point, 86% of my team actually came from the Googles, the Facebooks of the world. And so we were effectively here, and the rest of the opcos were kind of here. Today, it's actually a lot closer now because of the MAT culture that the Axiata group had kind of gone through and put in place.
Okay, interesting.
Hey, Foong, if I'm too long with some of these answers, please feel free to kind of interject. You know, like I can sometimes get completely carried away.
No worries,
it's been 7 years of my life.
No worries. Yeah, so yeah, you were talking about the differences in the mindset and culture between a digital company like ADS as well as the parent company, Axiata Group, which is a telco. And here I want to ask you a little bit about, you know, were there sort of any, because of that difference, right, were there any major pushbacks in terms of accepting ideas? Because obviously, you know, for you to proceed with some of the investments that ADS wants to make, I suppose you probably have to get the buy-in from, you know, your parent company. So any major pushbacks in terms of new ideas, risk-taking, and the whole concept of burning cash, right, in the initial stages. And perhaps this also potentially come at the expense of achieving a greater scale, you know, which you probably would have achieved if you were funded by venture caps instead, right?
Yeah.
And how do you balance that with, you know, financial discipline enforced by your parent? Perhaps that, on the positive side, could have helped kept things in check as well. So any thoughts on that? Yeah.
It was very, very challenging, especially in the I wouldn't say in the initial stages, because in the initial stages we were doing a lot of experiments, and actually experimentation is very, very low cost, right? You know, back in the days when if you like, say, the big farmers, the big pharmaceutical companies were doing research, you know, their R&D budgets were in the billions, right? You know, whether you're, I don't know, AstraZeneca or Pfizer's and whatnot, right? By the way, if you have time, and for the audience, if you're interested to, just listen to the video of how Moderna came up with their vaccine. I mean, literally, their first versions of their vaccine happened even before the WHO deemed this virus to be a pandemic. So it was so quick, right? From the time, I think it was something like from the time that the virus sequencing, genome sequencing was sort of published to the time that they had their first versions of the vaccine was something like 5 days. Right? And so experimentation now has changed. Like if you have an idea, you can go put it out there. I would reckon it will cost you less than $50,000 to actually sort of start up a company and put something out there and let people use it and let people try it, learn from it, and do, right? So in the initial days, it was actually relatively easy. The challenge came when you started needing to scale up some of these businesses, right? And we talked a little bit about e-commerce back then, right? Had I had the ability to, if the Axiata group had written, kind of not the $1 billion checks, but $100 million checks, and were able to stomach the continued losses from those e-commerce companies that we had built, right? We could have been a candidate for some of the consolidation that we're seeing in the Indonesian market right now. I'm sure you guys have all read about Gojek and Tokopedia, right? And that to me is an amazing outcome from what we had seen from Tokopedia. As I said before, at one stage we were the largest guy in town. We were bigger than Tokopedia, bigger than Bukalapak, bigger than Lazada, and to now see them become what they are, it's amazing, right? So yes, there was a lot of challenge, a lot of pushback. I think, and I think you hit the nail on the head in the sense that the composition of the shareholders just was sort of very, very different, right? I think if you like the Bukalapaks of the world, to a certain extent, they were either they were sort of built and owned by the families, if I can call it that, right? And the families obviously had a lot more control about their own money versus an organization like Axiata, where we are answerable to our shareholders, right? And if you look at our shareholders, the composition of our shareholders are mainly folks who were kind of people who wanted to invest in telcos, right? And obviously investing in telcos had a very different profile from investing in a tech startup. So there was always that clash that happened. And that was one of the major challenges that we faced early in the process. And continues to face to a certain extent, right? Except that now we've kind of proven the model a little bit. We have businesses that are profitable, that they're contributing both revenues and profits to back to the group. Number one, and number two, that we're actually starting to take money from outside as well, right? Be it SoftBank or Mitsui or Great Eastern, we basically raised quite a fair bit of capital from outside, people who probably had the kind of the right mindset to be investing in the digital tech companies as well.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot for that, Khairil. Okay, now I think let's take some questions from our participants. There are two questions here. Let me start off with the first one, and then we'll move on to the second one after you've answered. So the first question is from Muhammad Alif Noor. He's asking, how are you focused? What are you focusing in terms of digitalization, right, for the B40 and the micro SME segments? Are there any areas of are there any digital products or platforms that you are developing, that will help to serve these segments? These are his questions. Yeah.
The quick answer is yes, we are. In fact, actually, we're working very closely with MDEC on this. So we started the program last year when COVID hit, right? In a sense that you have a lot of your makcik nasi lemaks, your char kway teow uncle, whatever, that suddenly found it very, very difficult to be able to trade, right? To be able to do business. And for the most part, sometimes they will look at the charges of, if you like a Grab Food or a Food Panda and they will find it, relatively prohibitive, right? So we developed a lot of basic tools that will actually enable them to continue to be able to serve their customers, right? So let me give you some examples of this, right? So a program that we basically launched last year, which was actually quite successful. In fact, we actually signed up 15,000 SMEs, micro SMEs on this particular program, was essentially to help them put a mini site onto our platform. And the mini site is very, very simple for them to get on board, right? All they need to know how to do is to take pictures on WhatsApp, right? Because it's actually built on WhatsApp for Business. So all they need to do is to be able to take pictures of whatever they're trying to sell, right? Be it a nasi lemak or a teh tarik or whatever, and put that on the website for business. And then from our platform allows them to allows our consumers to kind of get into that WhatsApp for Business, and then they can then place the orders there. We created a HTML payment link such that actually, the payment can actually happen as well. And then we also work with partners to actually help them do the delivery. Although in most cases, the makcik will be cooking the nasi lemak in the kitchen, and then the pakcik will be on his motorbike delivering, right? And so some of them didn't actually kind of take it up. And so we've developed that into a program. The cost of entry for the micro SMEs is next to zero. And even if they do want to come on board the program, MDEC provides a grant for that, and that's why we're working very, very closely with MDEC to do that, right? And then obviously, if they want to kind of grow and scale up their business, we have the micro lending business, right? We actually supports them. It supports them on, if you like, working capital loan, credit line for them to buy more rice, more eggs, more whatever, right? Again, I'll share a little anecdote, Noor, if you allow me to. When I first started this business, and I don't know where the CGS-CIMB office is it in Menara CIMB? Your office is not in Menara CIMB, right?
We just moved from Menara CIMB to Menara MBC.
Okay. So Ruzi, you may remember this, but there was actually a makcik nasi lemak right at the if you like not the overhead pedestrian crossing, but the underground pedestrian crossing from KL Central to your office. And there was this amazing makcik nasi lemak there, and I used to go there as well because her nasi lemak was very good. But when they started constructing that overhead to connect from KL Central to Menara CIMB, obviously they asked her to move. And she was getting all worried. I was talking to her about it. I said, why don't you go down and set up a shop in the proper KL Central Station? Because they were doing renovations and new shop slots were being opened up. And she said in Malay to me, she said, tak ada modal, right? And so I said, and then I just pointed at your bank, right? I said, there's a bank in there. Interestingly, the two words that she said back to me now forms a little bit if you like, the mantra of why we want to go and help folks like that. She said two words, right? Segan, takut. All right. And that's because, you go into a bank, she's a makcik nasi lemak. She wears a baju kurung. She comes into the place with her flip-flops and whatnot. And she's afraid that, people will look down on her and whatnot, right? But thankfully, she mustered the courage to go in there. And then she were given a ton of forms to fill up. And she couldn't do it, right? Of course, she didn't have, her P&L statements from her business, right? And all that sort of wonderful stuff. So we created this business where we took alternative sources of data, punch it into a credit scoring engine. It's a machine learning credit scoring engine. And we were able to provide loans to this particular segment, right? The micro SMEs that Alinor just talked about. And so now, I think up till now, we've dished out about over $1 million of loans. A lot of these loans are really small, by the way. They're like, I think the average in Malaysia is 5,000 ringgit. The average in Indonesia is a little bit smaller than that. In Malaysia, we've actually dished out $100 million of these loans, and we've helped these businesses grow, right? And then we continue to want to do a lot of that, right? Because that's kind of our way to help bring our technology to help serve the underserved.
Okay.
I hope that answers his question.
Yes, it does, Khairil. Okay, so maybe a good segue to the second question as well, related to that question is there's a question here is asking about, if I can summarize it, is how does Axiata provide smaller companies with access to technology, that bigger company have access to, right? And as a result, that empower those smaller enterprises to do well in their businesses. So maybe you can give us some brief thoughts on that, in the interest of time.
Yeah, so I think what we do is effectively we build it for them, right? So if you look at our if you like, and I'll take Boost as an example. So Boost has a division called Boost Business, right, which is essentially catered for the SMEs, the micro SMEs. And essentially we built platforms for them to use, right? And generally these platforms are either zero, no charge or very, very little charge, right? Depending on what it is that we're providing the service for. Typically the technology solution that they are looking for is anything to help them grow their business. And what I mean by that is, for instance, can you help me reach out to more customers? Can you help me, grow my revenues in any way, right? Or flip side of that is to kind of reduce, if you like, the complexity of the cost of operation. Of course, they don't think about it that way. They think about it more in terms of, can it free up my time? Because I'm a sole proprietor, right? If it frees up my time, it basically means reducing my cost per se, right? And so again, we help them, with a lot of that, right? And so a lot of these platforms are things that we built for them. It is not like a Microsoft grade solution, but then again, they're not looking for a Microsoft grade solution, but it is, sort of what's, good enough for them to actually grow their business, right? So again, I'll go back to lending. We're not lending them 100,000 ringgit. We're lending them, sort of these small amounts with the view that as they grow their business, they will then graduate to be able to go into a bank and ask for the 100,000 ringgit of loan, because now they have credit history, right? They've been borrowing money from us. They've been, sort of rotating their loans with us. And so we get to a point where they actually can go into a CIMB and ask for a 100,000 ringgit loan from CIMB's SME division, right? And so we do a lot of things which are not at the highest grade for large enterprises, not the Microsofts of the world, but good enough for them to get their business growing to the point that at some stage they might need to upgrade to the Microsoft solution. That's the mentality and the mindset that we have.
Okay, great. Thanks, Khairil. Okay, so we do still have some questions from the call participants, but we'll get back to those questions in the later part of this conversation with Khairil. So on to the second part of this conversation, right? We want to talk a bit about the development of digital talent, culture, and mindset. So my question with regards to this topic, to start off with, when ADS was set up and you became its CEO, and you mentioned earlier on there was only 15 of you all to start with in 2014, right? How easy or how hard was it to find digital talent, and did you find them from within Axiata, or did you have to source externally?
It was very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. For many reasons. One is the concept of digital talent was has yet to be, it wasn't defined yet back then, right? So we were not necessarily looking for people with a lot of experience in places like the Googles of the world, right? In fact, back then, if you like, the Google operation in Malaysia was relatively small. Facebook in Southeast Asia was relatively small. Most of the folks that they had were largely more focused on sales as opposed to the engineering and the product development side. So it was very difficult for us to sort of look for the right folks, right? And so in a sense, then we went back to, if you like, kind of the culture that we had and how, and we were looking for people that kind of suited the culture, right? So, we had to completely transform the way that we did recruitment. So when we first started out Axiata Digital, obviously we followed the group process for recruiting folks, which basically means that you fill up a 5-page job description and and then hope that someone sort of meets the bill there. And then one of the first folks that actually I interviewed to kind of bring him onto Axiata Digital. This is a persistent Malaysian. He had done some startups in the UK, and very similar stories to a lot of returning Malaysians. Parents were getting old, so he wanted to come back to the region. I had nice coffee with him. I was very excited. At the end of the coffee, I said, look, just give me 24 hours. I'll send you a job description, and then we can take it from there. A long pause followed by, a statement that I will remember forever. He said, Khairil, the next person that asks you for a job description, that's the guy you don't want to hire. right? And it's very true when you think about the digital space that we're in, right? You know, whatever we bring you in for, it's likely going to change, right? Because we need to have that form of agility. And that's why we started focusing on, because we couldn't find the digital talent in our markets. We focused on people who had that, if you like, thought agility and who had the right fit with our culture. And we brought, you know, a number of folks in. At that stage, we also did, you know, a lot of, you know, hire fast, fire fast type mindset as well. So there were a lot of people kind of coming in and leaving us. Yes, we did bring a few folks from the telco, but we tend to bring in a lot sort of the folks who are a lot younger, who have not yet been corrupted, if I can call it that, by the culture in a large organization. So to answer your question, it was very, very difficult.
Okay, and you mentioned already about you know, some of the culture and mindset you know, that you think is critical, right, for a tech company and for within ADS itself earlier on during the conversation. Do you think that is already fully in place at ADS today?
I would say so. The only challenge we have now is, as we are growing to the size that we are right now, you know, how do we ensure that when we recruit, the person who's recruiting has the same ideals in terms of those values, same ideas and same ideals in terms of those values, as, if you like, the founding fathers, right, or the founding mothers, right? We want to make sure that that sort of cascades throughout the organization, but it's getting more and more difficult when you have 1,200 people and you're recruiting 200 per year, that sort of thing, right? It's a lot easier when it was just the 15 of us, and we were, you know, sort of recruiting, you know, 10 or 20, right? Very, very different. So yes, is it becoming a little bit more challenging for sure?
Okay, understood. Okay, now on to a slightly bigger picture question, I suppose, is a question on the readiness of our workforce, right? As the world moves towards digitalization and automation, do you think that you know, our Malaysian workforce is ready to become, you know, a high-skilled workforce, or is there a, you know, major risk of displacement in the coming years? And yeah, any skills and mindset gaps that you see?
Yeah, no. You use the word highly skilled, right? And I would start by saying, yes, we have a highly skilled workforce, but the challenge I find is, or I think the challenge that's going to come is, are they going to be future ready? I was part of a study that, you know, had a number of different institutions in it, including McKinsey, and one of the things that that they shared was, if you like, the occupations that will become redundant in the future, right? And one of them was a lawyer. My wife is a lawyer, by the way. You know, she's a trained lawyer, and she obviously disagreed with me. But when you dissect what she does, you very quickly come to the conclusion that actually a robot can do it, and a robot can probably do it better, right? There is a Israeli imaging company. It's called Zebra Imaging. You know, we're not invested in them, and you know, this is a company that I picked up in sort of a case study that I just read, where essentially they use machine learning to scan X-rays and CT scans to be able to identify tumors and so on and so forth, right? And of course, traditionally, it's been done by radiographers, right? The guys who are sort of and then once the radiographer has had an initial read, he'll pass it to the doctor, and then the doctor will sort of give you the consultation. And the company now has been sort of operating for about 5 years. Today, their robots, I call them robots. Today, their robots can do it with very, very low false positive rate. Coincidentally, the false positive rate of a human doing it is 90-something%. So chances are, when someone tells you you've got a cancer, you do want to get a second opinion, because especially if it's a human telling you that you have you have a tumor growing, you do want to get a second opinion. But if it's a machine telling you that, you know, you have a cancer tumor, chances are the machine's right. Yeah. So in that sense, that there are many different jobs that are becoming redundant right? They're highly skilled jobs, by the way. A radiographer is a specialist area, right? But they're becoming redundant. Lawyers are becoming redundant, and they will become redundant in the future. And so then the question then becomes, what do I study, right? I've got a son who's just graduated from university and one who's just about to enter, and there's always this question around kind of what do you study such that you can have a promising career in the future. It's a big question mark, right? Because I think if anything, it's more to do now with mindset. You do want to have, if you like, degrees or programs that gives you certain components, right? Sort of being analytical, having the ability to sort of process information, synthesize information, and create conclusions. Some of those things are still going to be incredibly critical, right? But the occupation itself could be completely redundant, and I think that's something that we as a nation were not quite ready for, right? By the way, just to push this thinking a little bit further, right? So one of the things that is a lot of people are very, very excited about is the field of data science and machine learning, right? And a lot of people are saying, I want to become a machine learning engineer, a data science engineer, or data scientist, right? And I would argue that actually even that might become redundant in the sense that actually there are what I call self-MLs or self-AIs that are out there, the automated MLs, that basically it's a machine writing code for itself, right? And they can actually do that very, very well now, right? With less mistakes, you don't have to debug the code, right? And so, that's going to happen. That's going to happen very soon. So then the question then becomes, what do humans do, right?
Okay, so I guess the advice to undergrads that have joined us on today's call with regards to what sort of specialization they should undertake, in their studies and all that to join the digital workforce. As you say, it's maybe not specifically to build a very specific skill set, but essentially to have analytical skills, basically broad skills to adapt, right?
Correct. Yeah. So it's a combination. So there'll be certain things that will never go away, right? Skill sets around thought leadership, skill sets around being analytical, skill sets around what do you call it, interpersonal skills, if you can call it that. The ability to to convey an idea, to speak out, and so on and so forth. Those will not go away, right? And you can get a robot to write you your speech, but at the end of the day, you still have to go deliver it, right? I don't think humans are at the point where they can be inspired by a robot giving a rah-rah speech, right? So as leaders, we still have to go out there and give a speech, right? But the one last thing I would say about sort of people who are coming out from universities, graduating right now, and this is something that I say to a lot of folks out there. It's a little bit of our initiative on getting the talent, and we like to catch them young. The reason why we like to catch them young is because and I know that some of the folks in the audience are sort of fresh out of school, fresh out of university, right? So, and you'll remember this a little bit better than I would, but I remember when I was at university, university students are largely idealistic, right? Which is why a lot of, revolutions, social revolutions and whatnot all started at universities, right? But they're a little bit idealistic. They always feel that they can change the world. The problem is once they then get into the corporate world, they're put in a cubicle, they're told to dress a certain way. I can tell you for a fact that, in one of the job interviews I had, I showed up with actually a pink long sleeve shirt, right? It was a consulting firm, it wasn't Bain, it was one of those that I interviewed with, and they asked me, do you have a blue shirt or a white shirt? I said, I don't, right? And say, well, you're gonna have to buy some or dye some, right? Because that's how they dressed, and they pointed out that I was wearing white socks with black shoes. Of course, now I know you don't wear white socks with black shoes, right? But I was wearing it then, and they pointed it out to me. My point being that you come out into the corporate world, you're put in a cubicle, you're told to dress a certain way. You see all the seniors, sitting in those corner offices, and you aspire to kind of get one of those, right? And very, very soon, that spirit that you have, you start losing it, right? Now, we at Axiata Digital, we don't want you to lose that spirit. And that's why we go out and we try to recruit a lot of very young talent, because they will come in and they will say, why do we pay for parking this way? Why can't we pay for parking this other way, right? Or why is it that customer service needs to approach it this way? Why can't it be that way? So they're maybe the word is they've not been corrupted. They're still very fresh. But also idealistic in the sense that they ask the sort of the question on why can't it be done this particular way, right? And that allows us to think about all the problems that we as consumers or we as humans are facing, and then to find different ways of solving those humans, and then kind of build a business around it. And that's what we want to do, right? So for all of those, who are out there in the audience who are being told to dress a certain way, obviously have conversation with your parents about it, but you might want to rethink your careers.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so Khairil, I think here, let me throw in a question from one of our call participants. And I suppose this person is trying to decide between, perhaps after graduating, right, whether he should join a consultancy like management consultancy like what you did, or perhaps to work in a corporate entity, right? And he's asking here, which experience do you think is more valuable in making you an effective leader in your organization?
That's a great question. So I would say that you joined consulting because, or at least I joined consulting because the learning curve was incredibly high. But then I would say that if you are interested in going to consulting, you also want to find a way to try to shape your consulting career in such a way that your learning continues to be very high. So there are some consulting firms who might throw you into a client project, and you may be stuck in the same client project for 2 years, right? It might be a system integration type project that you're doing and it may be for an airline. Those kind of programs can be very, very long. And so you might be stuck in that environment for 2 years. There's not a lot of learning that can happen after, say the first 9 months or so, right? And so if you're going to join consulting for the purpose of learning, then you want to be able to sort of shape that that career as well. Likewise, in a corporate entity, I think organizations like Axiata, CIMB, UEM, they have all these talent programs where they do, if you like, talent rotations, right? So for the first, say, 2 to 3 years, you'll spend 6 months, so for instance, within Axiata group, the young talents that kind of come in, they'll spend 6 years per operating company, right? So they might spend, 6 months, not 6 years, 6 months in, say, Celcom, and then they'll go 6 months in Axiata Digital, and then they might spend 6 months in corporate center, they might spend 6 months thereafter in E.co, right? So it gives you a little bit of that job rotation, but not only that, also the job variety as well, for you to kind of pick up a lot of different skills, right? And I think so that's why, to answer your question, I think it a little bit depends on what kind of consulting firm and what kind of corporate entity that you're joining. I think the corporate entity part does actually give you sort of all the skill sets that you need in the early stages of the career. But likewise, I think the management consulting also kind of helps you accelerate some of these goals, right? But your question was actually quite specific around leadership, right? And I think one of the things that you will notice is that, in consulting, you don't actually get to lead teams until you're into kind of your 3rd or 4th year. Whereas in an organization like Axiata Digital, I mean, we have squad leaders. Sorry, I'm using squad leaders. The word squad comes from our agile model. For those of you who are not familiar, in the agile models, you organize an organization in tribes and squads. So we have squad leaders who, may be leading a particular sub P&L, and they can be young as sort of 3 to 5 years out from graduation, right? And so in that sense, then they also have a lot of experience and exposure on leadership, right? But whatever it is, my advice to those in the audience would be, especially the younger ones, would be to kind of take destiny into your own hands a little bit. I often say that there are 3 types of people, right? One who will see an opportunity come and go by and not do anything about it. There's another group of people who will see an opportunity and then potentially jump on it. And then there's a third group of people, and I'm hoping that you in the audience will become that set of people who will actually go create your own opportunities, right? And that's when you actually take your own fate in your own hands, your own destiny in your own hands. You shape your own career. So when I was at Bain & Company, I was probably the most traveled consultant out of the Singapore office. My first office was actually Singapore because I ended up working in San Francisco, Sydney. So I tried to do all the S offices, by the way, Seoul, San Francisco, Sydney. I didn't get to Stockholm, didn't get to Sao Paulo, but I also worked, out of Hong Kong. I worked in Beijing and in Shanghai in the early days of the boom in China. I spent a lot of time in Munich. I spent a fair bit of time in London. And because I wanted to shape my own destiny, I would say, hey, look, I want to be part of that project. Can I go? I look for the right person to go talk to. And that's how I sort of was shaping the opportunities that came by, as opposed to sitting back and being a bystander.
Okay, yeah, that's good advice for our undergrads that are on the call today. Okay, so with that, let me move to the next major topic of our discussion today, which is on rapid technological changes. And in the digital space, somebody's always buying or forming partnerships with someone else, right? Or has a new technology that's going to disrupt. So how do you ensure that the ADS keeps up, not become irrelevant, and also be in the position to capture new promising digital opportunities that come up?
Yeah, so we employ both a top-down and a bottom-up approach, right? The top-down one is fairly similar to what a lot of large organizations would do in terms of innovation, right? Where they have an innovation function. These guys do the periodic scanning of some of the new technologies, and then will then kind of translate that into certain implications. And then they may have certain squads that they'll then go out and take some of these implications and then actually try to do some experiments around it, right? So this is effectively the top-down approach, right? And so some of the things that we are looking at right now is around blockchain and how do we implement blockchain within our environments. I'm personally looking very closely at what 5G will mean, not just to the telco world, because we know the implication of the telco world, right? A lot of more capex that's going to come, but more in terms of the use cases that are going to come with 5G, right? To me, 5G is not about more video, right? It's not about better video quality. Hell no. In fact, actually, 5G is not about the consumer anymore, but it's about every other sort of devices that surrounds the consumer. So I'm starting a lot around that, right? But that's kind of, if you like, the top-down approach to innovation. But I think a lot of what we do, in fact, more of what we do is focus on kind of the bottom-up approach to innovation, right? And that's why we break our universe into these various squads, right? And these various squads either focus on a particular vertical or a particular user group or a particular segment, right? And what they do is obviously they build products, functions, features for those segments that they're going after, right? So as an example, in Boost, obviously we have what we call transportation and transport and transit squad, right? And what they typically would think of is, sort of solutions to help the driver, help the driver, help the person who's going to doing transit on what type of solutions, would help them in their daily lives, right? And so they would, for most parts, sometimes you'll see some of our squad members basically just going around. Of course, it's a little bit difficult now with COVID-19, but they'll go around and they'll observe people, right? They'll just kind of watch and look and you see what they do, see what kind of challenges that they have, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And then try to think about, okay, given the technology we have, right, what can we do? Given the technology that's out there, what can we do to kind of help them solve these sort of problems, right? So we tend to have both a top-down approach, but the top-down is sort of more sort of meta-level innovation, strategic level innovation. But we find that the micro innovations that happen bottoms up from the squads, those are the more powerful ones.
Okay, and pertaining to being in a position to capture new promising digital opportunities, and I'm sure many have come ADS way in the last 7 to 8 years, including, as you mentioned, the approach from Spotify way back in 2012 for a partnership. So through this 7-8 years, and through what you've learned, can you share with us maybe some of the principles that you think have guided you in making the right decisions on whether to invest in these companies or to form partnerships with these companies? And are there any major signposts or ingredients that you would be looking for in a tech startup, as a potential indicator of its future success?
Yeah, so no, great question. So let me start with sort of our approach to partnership, right? So typically our approach to partnership again is both proactive and reactive, right? In the sense that proactive, sometimes we kind of proactively go out and talk to partners because we want to kind of join hands. Sometimes it's reactive. Someone comes to us and we never even thought about doing any kind of partnership with you. But what's going to be very important is their willingness to very quickly sit together for a, call it a half-day brainstorming workshop, right? Ideation workshop. Because if you're not willing to kind of just sit down and throw all your assets on the table, all your capabilities on the table, and let's see what we can cook up together, then we may never know where this partnership will go, right? We don't want partnership that is very narrow on a particular item, right? We want to kind of form these very strategic collaborations where it's basically a broad area of collaboration, right? So as many of you know, we recently signed a deal with RHB to join them and participate with them in the digital bank license application, right? But that's just a small part of a broad set of different things that we are working with them, right? And it came from an initial conversation with some subsets of their teams to think about the different things that we could do together. So we had that whole ideation session, and then obviously from that ideation session we picked up a couple of things that we actually did launch, right, as an experiment. And the good thing about RHB back then is they were willing to experiment with a small startup like us. We were a boost. We were back then, I don't know, probably no more than 1 million customers when we first started working with RHB, and they were willing to experiment with us. And today, that experimentation has kind of gone on to sort of greater heights. So we tend to want to work on partnerships that people are willing to sort of throw everything into the pot and then see what happens, right? And then we do that with ideation, and then we do that very, very quickly, followed by some sort of experimentation to take some of those ideas and make that happen, right? So that's effectively our partnership philosophy, right? It's a very deep form of collaboration that we would like to have. In terms of the startup ecosystem and what we tend to look for, obviously there are effectively kind of our set criteria, right? So if you like, I would kind of point out to three. One is what problem is it that you're trying to solve, right? And within that problem that you're trying to solve, are you then coming up with a solution that would really, really solve the problem at heart, right? That's one. And then the second part then is, if you like, the unit economics. I don't look at financial projections and so on and so forth, right? Because that one, it's crystal ball gazing, right? But the key is, again, we talked a lot about it early in the conversation, but it's the unit economics, right? In solving that problem, can you create an operating model or a business model that for every product that you sell or every time you solve that problem, can you make money? Because if you cannot, then the whole equation sort of breaks down, and there isn't. So we look at these two things very, very closely, right? So within that, then later on, once we've proven that the unit economics is sound and is robust, then we'll start looking at projection. We'll start looking, okay, how big the market is and who are the other competitors in the space, potential competitors in the space, blah blah blah. But those were the two fundamental ones that we would start with, right? The third one that I mentioned there was three. The third one is then to look at the team. And sometimes it is not to sort of say, hey, look, this team is not great, I'm not going to invest in them. But it's also sort of to look at them and say, hey, look, this team, there's some great assets in there, but it needs to be complemented by, perhaps, someone with the right technology mindset or someone with the right experience in UI, UX, given that that's such an important and a critical part of the whole problem solving ambition that they have, right? So the third component that we look at is actually the team, right? We scrutinize the team, because at the end of the day, you want to throw money into them. You're going to ask the question, do I trust Foong with this $20 million check that I'm about to write him, right? And that's something that we sort of pay quite a fair bit of attention to.
Okay. So I guess now is a good time to also take up another question from one of our call participants, since we're talking about rapid technological changes, right? So The question from one of our participants is, he's asking, what technology, on the shelf right now excites you, Khairil? I think he's asking more of a general question, but yeah, what technology excites you currently?
So technology, I guess, when you say off the shelf, I'm thinking like if there's a solution or there's a service provider or there's a company that I can kind of pull off the shelf and borrow the technology or use the technology, right? I think there are a few, but let me elevate that, because obviously, if I mention them, then maybe one of the more astute members of the audience will go and start investing in those companies, right? And then it'll become too expensive for us to go buy. So what I would talk about, so I'll talk a little bit more around sort of the technology itself, right? So I've mentioned a few already on this call. One is obviously blockchain. I think the application around blockchain is just in its infancy. A lot of it has to do with cryptocurrency right now, but to me, I think blockchain, hyperledgering, it's a form to monitor very, very secure transactions, right? And as we think about all the technological use cases that are coming in the pipeline, we need it to be more and more secure. I do think that the way in which these chains are assembled, for those of you who know about it, I think that needs to change a little bit because I'm not too excited about the effects that it has on the environment. I think you guys all know that in order to put the chains together, you'll have these miners, right? And in order to mine the chain, it consumes quite a lot of processing requirements, and therefore you burn up a lot of electricity is being consumed, right? So I do think that whole model needs to change a little bit. But the idea that you take a transaction, you break it into various different chains, and then you have to reassemble those chains to test whether this is sort of the legit transaction. I think that excites me a lot because I think the use cases around that is enormous. All right, that's number one. Number two, I think we're still in the infancy around machine learning and around AI. This is one that both excites me and scares me, in the sense that I've seen what machines can do. And it scares me, right? Those of you who've seen the movie, what is it, Terminator, right? it is very, very possible, very, very possible. Just combine what the folks at Boston Dynamics are doing versus what, if you like, Google DeepMind, Deep AI is doing, and you can very quickly come to those scary scenarios that we saw in the Terminator, right? It's very, very possible. Like I said, right? There are now AI engines that can actually auto AI, that can actually auto ML. They can do it themselves, right? So the humans are actually sort of redundant in that process, right? Machines are coming up with their own languages now. That and this is something that I heard from. So I was talking to the head of machine learning at Google. I was invited to their what's called Googleplex, and he was basically telling me, and I think the story is actually quite common now, right? That basically they discovered after a while that some of their machines were talking to each other without the humans knowing about it in a language that the humans didn't understand. So they pulled the plug on it. Right, and that's kind of how scary things have become, right? But at the same time, I think machine learning just allows us to solve so many problems that we as humans, we haven't yet been able to solve, right? Because their processing capability, their cognitive capability of the machine is becoming so sophisticated. Obviously, we're deploying them in some areas, and we're doing that in our ad tech business that help clients connect to the very customer that they're looking to connect to. We're using that in our lending business, basically finding different ways to credit score a makcik nasi lemak using artificial intelligence, using machine learning, right? So that's the second category of thing that I'm very excited about. The third one is IoT. And this is linked to 5G, which is why I'm a little bit excited on 5G. I see the question around 5G in the Q&A, and I don't know whether I want to go into that question. But to me, 5G, the big delta around 5G is the fact that they can cover 1 million devices in 1 square kilometer. So if you take like, and so if you imagine, that basically means like if there are 500,000 people each holding 2 handsets in a square kilometer, then that will take up the full capacity of the 5G tower within a square kilometer. But then again, I mean, 500,000 humans in 1 square kilometer would make it, I think it's 30 times more dense than the most densely populated city in the world. I think Dhaka is the most densely populated city in the world, and it's about 15,000 inhabitants per square kilometer, right? So 1 million devices in 1 square kilometer is a lot. So it's no longer going to be about our phones. It's going to be, you know, about the glasses that I'm wearing, that it's actually connected to the cloud, that when, you know, 20 years from now, you know, I walk down the street and I see Foong and I don't recognize him anymore, but my glasses will tell me that, oh, that's Foong, and you did a chat with him on the 7th of July, 2021, right? And all of that will sort of come back to me. Autonomous vehicles will finally be enabled, right? Because part of the issue with autonomous vehicles today is that we don't have a zero latency network. 5G is a zero latency network. Zero latency is important because you don't want there to be a time lag between the fact that the car saw a pedestrian rushing across the street to the time that the car stops, right? The information needs to go up to the cloud and needs to come back, you know, in the instant, right? And so that's why we need zero latency processing, and 5G enables you to do that, right? But when you have, you know, 1 million devices in a square kilometer, everything around it, your fridge, your toilets, your cars, your watches, your glasses, you know, the billboards, everything will be connected. Everything that let's say if you do sit in an office, everything in your office will be connected, right? So and that's when things kind of change completely. So I think the one that I'm looking at very, very closely right now is IoT. I think IoT as a technology has been around, or at least as a concept, has been around for at least about 5, 6, 7 years. But I think the game changer is happening now, and it's because of 5G. Yeah. So those are the 3 that I'm actually particularly excited about. I think there are going to be quite some interesting businesses or business models that are going to emerge from this. As we talk about IoT, maybe if I can segue very, very quickly, the one thing that I would personally like to sort of put some resources behind and some time behind. We talked a lot about sort of capturing data, but a lot of that data right now is coming from our devices. In the world of IoT, I want to find a way to capture the data from those million devices that are out there and be able to monetize them in some ways, right? That's probably some things that I've started seeing some Silicon Valley startups actually starting to focus on that. The mashup of all the data that is coming from those various devices and finding monetizable use cases out of it.
Okay, great. So I guess for the call participant that asked the question, invest in companies that are involved in blockchain, AI and machine learning and IoT 5G. Yeah, so that is the brief
It's very,
answer.
very broad, very broad. Actually, the one company that is investing in 5G directly or indirectly are telcos, right?
Yes, that's right. Okay. Okay, and maybe coming to the last part of our conversation is asking you about your thoughts on the tech scene in Malaysia. How do you see it? Is it bustling? And perhaps more importantly, what is the level of innovation, right, of our local tech startups, companies, compared to other markets in the region? I mean, we've heard about how Indonesia is red hot right now, right, with startups going for listings and all that. So some thoughts on that, and then if you can also follow up later on after that to talk a bit about what we can do as a country, right, to accelerate growth of our tech industry.
Yeah, it's a very, very tough question to answer, Foong, right? Because obviously we get exposure to multiple markets right now. You mentioned Indonesia. It's a very exciting scene that we're seeing right there. The one thing, and I don't want to start with a negative, but I guess because we talked about Indonesia, I'm going to start with a somewhat of a negative in Malaysia, in the sense that, and this is not just about tech, but this is just in general entrepreneurialism in Indonesia, right? So by and large, Indonesia is a very, very large country. In many areas, and I hope I'm not offending any Indonesian by saying this, but in many areas, the government is not able to cater to the needs of either the industry, the consumer, or the citizen, right? So in that sense, then Indonesians have become super industrious, right? They basically, kind of build things knowing that actually, you know what, the government's not going to help me. I need to kind of create this, and I need to sort of solve it, in the way that that works for the country, or that works for my market, or that works for my consumer segment, right? And that's why you see, sort of entrepreneurship really, really bustling, right? And with that sort of spirit of entrepreneurship, that's why it's no surprise that we see all these major startups happening in Indonesia. Of course, helped by the fact that it's actually also a very, very large market, right, with the population that they have there. One example I always give is like what you call it? Every time you're stuck in a junction in Indonesia, there'll be this guy who will stop traffic for you, and of course you wind down the window and you give him a few rupiahs, right, and he's happy, right? But that's the industrious nature of the Indonesian population, right? When they had the, what do you call it, the minimum number of people who can enter into the restricted zones, not that it's a good thing, but then you had sort of mothers and children sort of waiting by the side of the street so that you can go pick them up, so that you meet the minimum number of people in a car that's allowed to enter the restricted zones, right? They are incredibly industrious, and that's why you had things like Ojek, which is obviously the foundation in which Gojek came about. I think to a certain extent, I think in Malaysia, we have a lot of folks who have those kind of ambitions, have those kind of spirit, have those kind of dreams. But the negative, I was going to say, the negative here is that sometimes because our governments are a heck a lot more efficient, and we have sort of GLCs who kind of want to play, including Axiata, who want to play too big of a role, we tend to swallow up not necessarily the startup per se, but the spirit behind the startup, right? Which then sort of does not allow for a lot of these startups to kind of continue to flourish and so on and so forth, right? We tend to want a lot of these large corporations, and I say this very carefully because obviously Axiata is one of them, right? Would very want to quickly kind of come in there and and take a big chunk of it, and then say, hey, look, you must link all your synergies to the assets that we have, and so on and so forth, right? And that makes it very, very difficult for it to flourish. But I am still very bullish about the scene here. I mentor a few startups in the Malaysian ecosystem, and I do think that what we do have is we have, if you like, kind of the right talent pool to build and incubate ideas that can very, very quickly be transported to the other parts of the world, right? Now, Anthony Tan may not want to admit it, but he started Grab Taxi in Malaysia, right? And it was a Malaysian company for the longest time until the Singapore government threw him a lot of incentives for him to sort of move over to Singapore. But and he chose Malaysia partly because he's Malaysian, but also the fact that there was sort of the right talent pool to kind of get them going. Now, of course, once you build yourself to sort of the regional scale, what you then want to do, which is something that we do at Axiata Digital, is we want to leverage the talent pools that we have across the footprints that we're at. But in terms of a startup, ecosystem, this is as good as any place in the region to start up.
Understood. Thank you so much, Khairil, for your answers on that question. Actually, in the interest of time, we still have quite a few questions in the pipeline from our callers today, but I think I just want to pick up one last question before I pass it back to Ruzi for closing remarks. And this one, I think, calls out to us at CGS-CIMB and also to myself. The question is, and I'm just going to read it through. He says, hi, sir. Digitalization really helps a lot in getting things done, especially for disabled people like me. But one of the things I notice is that many apps, websites, or platforms built by locals are not so disabled friendly, like the design of the user interface. So his question is, what is your view on this, and what can be done so that local developers and the tech companies will pay attention to accessibility, including for the disabled community? Maybe we'll end with the last question from the caller with this question.
It's a great question to end with, I think. And actually the answer lies somewhere in the question itself, right? And in fact, actually, the answer the answer kind of combines the previous question with this question, right? So part of the challenge is that, and I hope I don't offend anybody by saying this, right? But the disabled community as a whole is still a relatively small market, right? A lot of these tech companies, a lot of these local developers are building businesses because in some way, shape, or form, it is the way for them to cari makan, right? It's a way for them to earn a living, and so I think in many of the domains, if you like, there's not enough of a market for the local developers or the tech companies to put enough emphasis or to put enough focus to developing for the disabled friendly products. I would say though that we kind of experimented a little bit, or we looked into it a little bit in the early stages, not so much early, but middle stages of Axiata Digital. But one of the things that we learned is that actually being disabled is also sort of a very broad statement in the sense that there are so many different types of disability, and therefore which ones do you sort of try to cater for, right? And I remember at that stage we tried to kind of incorporate, especially for those who may have problems with their limbs, we tried to incorporate voice activation, right? Because actually voice recognition technology is very, very sophisticated today. Back in the days, when Foong, you and I started our careers, every time we wanted to use a voice recognition dictation system, you say something and these guys can't even recognize what you just said, right? Today it's very, very precise now, right? Again, machine learning kind of had something to do with that. So for the limb, for people who had sort of challenges with their limbs, we were looking at voice activation to a certain extent. Obviously it was a pretty high cost to sort of be able to incorporate into our apps, and that's why given the market that we were looking for, we didn't prioritize that. It's still not something that we are not ever going to do. It's something that we will look at some stage, right? But I would say though that there are enough of folks out there that want to bring technology to help the various segments of the population that need help, right? To a certain extent, when we first ventured out to build our micro-lending business, it was actually to help if you like, it was to broaden the financial inclusion, right? To help the underserved communities to be able to procure the loan. The makcik nasi lemak who didn't want to go into a bank because she was takut or segan, right? To actually go into the bank. So I think there are a lot of groups out there right now who are looking to build technology, to bring technology to actually help the less able members of our society, right? But to the person who sort of raised this question, I mean, I'm really glad you did it, because it is a reminder to people like myself, leaders like me, that we haven't done enough yet, right? And so I'm really glad you raised this question, and it's now going to force me to go back and think about what I can do as a leader, what I can do within our organizations to do more to help people who are less able than Foong, myself, and others in the audience. Yeah, thank you for bringing up that question.
Okay, thank you so much, Khairil, for sharing your thoughts on my questions, as well as those from our participants today. Let me now hand the call back to Ruzi for some closing remarks.
Thank you, Foong. Looks like we are at the end of our discussion today, and I would like to thank Khairil for sharing the concept of agile leadership and adaptability in solving problems in different ways depending on the situation. Key takeaways that resonates very well here is to always be humble, agile, adaptable, team up, and collaborate. These are definitely the driving elements to scale up. And for the millennials, like Khairil said, shape up your own destiny and create your own opportunity. I would also like to thank all participants for your enthusiasm, warm engagement, and support. We look forward to seeing you in many more talk series to come, and thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone, and thanks, Khairil.
Yeah,
Thank
you, Foong. Thank you, Ruzi. Thank you, members of the audience. Hope that was useful.
Definitely. And stay safe, everyone.
Take care. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.